Well, for more, let's bring in Perry Wong, Managing Director of Research at the Milken Institute. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, Perry, what sort of impact do you think the AIIB will have on similar development groups like the World Bank, the ADB, and the NDB?
I don't think there will be actually any impact by large count, because currently the demand for infrastructure financing and infrastructure developments are so huge that I think any new player are pretty much welcome into that space. And I think secondly, the mandate of the AIIB is on infrastructure, while the mandate for the World Bank and ADB are pretty much on poverty and development and infrastructure. So they are not in a direct cross space in that sense.
So would you say there's a unique role that the AIIB fills when it comes to multilateral funding in Asia that some of these organizations just don't?
Well, AIIB, I think, look at Asia's development and think that the leadership, I think the Chinese governments and the Chinese company in the last 30-some years have built up expertise in infrastructure building. And if you look back in time, the success story of China pretty much linger on two things: infrastructure and urbanization. And that is occurring very rapidly in Asia. So in that sense, the Chinese government, and I think that they can exert the leadership and think that it can bring the economic development into another level.
Now, notably absent from this banking group, the United States. So what do you think is behind their reluctance to join?
I think the United States wait and see. I don't think the United States ever said that the U.S. would never join. I think the reason perhaps is reflect on some of the critique on whether the standardization of the lending or the transparency on picking and choosing projects. So some decided they should wait and see and maybe join later.
And with that being said, what do you think will perhaps be the tipping point that might lead the U.S. to actually join?
I think when others see the opportunity, I think both such as England looking into the Asia space, and we all see that Asia will be one of the fastest growing region in the next decades to come. So that would be huge economic opportunities.
And given China's growing economic influence, many analysts thought it was just a matter of time before something like the AIIB came about. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think economic development, and those are more economic interests, I think, than anything else from my perspective. I think when asked why China would do that, or when or how AIIB would get into this space, I think the answer is quite simple and straightforward. It's economics, and still economics. So because that space pretty much holds the future of industrialization, urbanization, and if people 30 years ago look at China as a huge market, and Japanese companies, American companies, European companies going into Asia, help build the infrastructure, that will be today's story on China looking upon the Asia territory and think that the same story can be repeated. So that actually is a very straightforward story from economic development standpoint.
Now, what would you say to some of the critics who are saying that having the AIIB really separates the developing world from the developed world? Would you say that's fair?
No, I think on the contrary. I think AIIB, along with ADB and World Bank and all those multilateral organizations, their efforts are actually to closing the gap between the developed and developing world.
And lastly, as we look ahead, for the people who are actually living in these countries that have joined the AIIB and perhaps maybe don't understand how this decision will affect them, explain to our viewers how it does affect the people living in these countries.
Oh, I think they can. On the contrary, I think they can understand the implication. I think, for example, today, the estimated funding gap is $8 trillion. And that's based on the 2010-2020 periods. So as we can see, those quote-unquote funding gaps are based on today's projections. As those economies and those countries are advancing, people live in Myanmar, people live in Bangladesh, in somewhat more remote regions. Currently, they don't have access to roadway. import to export their products if those can be done and they can yield direct benefit, and you can help a lot of entrepreneurs in those countries.